Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. A game today that I thought was important and symbolic. Arizona crushes the Bears 29-9. Kyler Murray barely had to throw. There was a lot of, they led 21-9 at half. I think the bigger story is Caleb Williams was ineffective. The offensive line was overwhelmed. The offensive line, I've talked about this so many times, John, defensive coaches and offensive lines are a problem. The Bears, Caleb's been outplayed badly by Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels the last 2 weeks. He's dancing around in the back, getting sacked by Arizona. Offensive line's gotten worse. And I watched today, there was a safety on the Bears at one point as they lost 29-9. There wasn't, once we got to the second quarter, there wasn't a minute I thought Chicago could win. I think Caleb is clearly, even though Bo Nix got rolled today, Baltimore at home is a much better. That was one of the easiest bets of the year, taking the Ravens minus 8-9. Bo Nix looks like he's got it under control. I think he really looks like, for the personnel they have, obviously
he actually didn't play terribly today.
No, he wasn't. He just, they don't have 7 guys who would start for the Ravens. They have Patrick Surtain, maybe a safety. That's about it. But when I look at Caleb right now, they average 3.4 yards a play. It is screaming to get rid of Matt Eberflus. The whole game, I'm like, it just doesn't work. He doesn't have the right coordinator. It's a mess in Chicago now.
Well, if I had told you by the middle of the season that if the Bears called up the Washington Commanders and said, before the season, and said, would you trade Jaden Daniels straight up for Caleb Williams? And the Commanders would laugh at them and hang up the phone, you would have said the Bears have serious issues, because 2 things can be true. Today was an embarrassing day for Eberflus, but so was last week. And so was this offseason, when it was pretty clear you're putting this guy into a lame duck situation. This is not a McCarthy that, at least, listen, I know he's under his last year, but he has a long resume of success, and he coaches the quarterback who you're going to pay $200 million to. This is a head coach. Yeah, he's a good defensive coach, never won anything, and you have no faith that he's going to do it. And now you have to fire him a year in. But I think the bigger picture, you see it with Trevor Lawrence. They brought in Doug, and this is just not going well for him relative to hype. These things can snowball and get out of hand fast, and you invested. Actually, you didn't, because you made the trade, but you got this player. You chose him over these other players, specifically Jaden, who, again, long way to go. Ideally, they both have 15-year careers. Jaden Daniels is currently one of the best players in the NFL.
No question.
One of the best players in the NFL.
And looks totally under control.
And Caleb looks like a mid-round pick forced to start because a quarterback got injured in the preseason. He makes some plays, but he misses a lot of stuff that, listen, we saw him make in college, and this gets back to people that were questioning him. He can freelance and get a little willy-nilly, and that doesn't really work in the NFL. And you see him just get peppered. He's not comfortable in the pocket. The coaching staff's terrible. I do think the Tyreek Stevenson benching was just a joke. And if I'm Eberflus, I wouldn't want him inactive. I'd want to just start him. But if you're Ryan Poles, you're not going anywhere. You want to show all these other guys that, like, the standards are high. They're in no man's land, right? They really are. And I doubt they would fire. That's a fireable game. I don't expect the Bears to fire him. But these last 2 weeks, they were thoroughly outplayed the week before too, right? It was, I know the Hail Mary, but they were worked that game. We know before they even get to the tough stretch of their season, this ain't a playoff team. This team, Arizona, that to me is like a fringe wild card team, just beat the living piss out of them. I just can't take the Bears seriously anymore.
No, and this was supposed to be the 2-game stretch, Arizona and New England next, where they had a shot, right, to make up some ground before they go into Detroit, Minnesota, San Francisco, Green Bay. I think I've always said there's 1 or 2 things in football that are undervalued, and yet they're things we know are valuable. I think a great offensive coordinator or great offensive coach, you're better on third down. You're better on offensive line. You're better at drafting offensive personnel. The Rams just figure out ways to mix and match their offensive line. They're in a wild one with the Seahawks today, but they're still, ham and egging it in the interior of the offensive line. These defensive coaches, Chicago's offensive line last year felt like an ascending group. You had your tackles, little soft in the middle. It is a mess with Caleb Williams' mobility. It's a mess today. So I just think you get to a point where I don't think people understand the difference between a really smart offensive coach and an average defensive coach. It is a touchdown to 10-point difference a game.
I do think, too, that moment last week on the Hail Mary was reflective of their head coach, right? Because let's take a couple of top defensive coaches, right? Tomlin, John Harbaugh, a special teams guy, but he also a DB guy. You could never envision that play with that player happening, taunting the crowd. Like that just would never happen with the Ravens and Steelers in that moment. So to me, that reflected, let alone like he's been pretty good on defense. Today, he loses his best defensive player. James Conner looked like Walter Payton against him. I mean, it was like you guys are that dependent on one guy. And offensively, I always talk about like defensive guys know nothing about offense, right? They know how to stop offenses, but they're not calling the plays. They're not in their coaching, in terms of during the week.
Brady made fun of Belichick, not even understanding the terminology of offense.
Yeah, the Bears, honestly, this goes back to what, 10 months ago, 11 months ago, when they knew and they tried to have their cake and eat it too and keep their fingers crossed. And now they're going to have to fire this guy. And it sets the whole clock off when they could have just started at scratch. Maybe Ben Johnson would have been interested. Maybe they could have hired Vrabel and just had a fresh runway. Now you derail everything. Because one thing you would say is like, well, Eberflus is kind of good on defense. So now you get a new guy. It just upsets the apple cart, which needed upsetting in January. I mean, and today was really bad because coming off that loss, I thought two teams had huge bounce. Like to me, the Ravens of last year blow the team out. And they did today. So it's like, okay, the Browns game, weird outlier. Jameis got hot. Throw that away. The Ravens are the real deal. And the Bears, like, okay, if this is going to be a wild card team, they come into Arizona, even if it's tight. Arizona's not easy.
Yeah,
you win the game. I live out here. I would imagine that would half the stadium was Bears fans.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal for them. And they got, like you said, that game was over before it even started. They got shellacked.
Arizona is in first place. I've been saying
they look
this
good.
For 3
They look good.
They look good. Now they've got the Jets, a team that, looks good at home on Thursday nights, but has not been a team that can go on the road. And it feels like the Jets only play home games, I swear. So now they go on the road to Arizona between McBride, Harrison, who's hot and cold, Kyler. Their protection's okay. I just
how good is the tight end is a fantastic player.
Yeah. I think Arizona is a sneaky good football team, and I think the Jets Arizona next week is a fantastic game. It's a great, and I don't want to just talk about the Bears because we've been on this for about a month. If you don't watch Arizona, and you're saying who are they beating? No, they beat San Francisco. They got dudes offensively. They've got a star every unit, and they're good enough on the offensive line. You've been on Connor since last year, the running back. So this isn't just about Chicago. Arizona keeps you on your toes. They didn't even throw the ball for long stretches today. They just moved the pocket and highly effective.
One thing, remember after they lost the Super Bowl 2 years ago, everyone thought Jonathan Gannon was like the village idiot, right?
Yeah.
Because he blew some coverages and they walked right in for touchdowns. And when he got hired, he had some of those moments that kind of went viral that made him look like a nerd or whatever. All my buddies with the Eagles said they loved him. And they said, I'll promise you this. I don't know if he's, Belichick or Bill Walsh schematically, but I think he's going to be a better head coach than he was a coordinator. And he was a pretty good coordinator for us. He's a great leader. And you watch his teams, Niner game, huge comeback. The Dolphins win last week. I would say age better today. They look way better with Tua. Like they look like a real football team. They were down double digits on the road. Usually West Coast teams flying to the East Coast, that early kickoff, historically have always looked pretty shitty in that spot. Yeah. They come storming back. And then today you're like, oh, this could be a little letdown spot with the Bears, little chip on their shoulder. And they came, they look like a division. They look like a playoffs team today.
Yep.
And their physicality, Buda Baker, when he's healthy, he's flying around. Their defense just well coached, makes a bunch of tackles, and they have a physical presence to their offense. And like you
Yep.
said, like I think Kyler, I know, and Jonathan Gannon has talked about this all the time, and I see him on a bunch of like local TV out here as press conferences. Listen, I can't speak to what he was like before me. This is him talking. He has been mature. So that Call of Duty guy, I do think he's been a lot better for them. And maybe it's just a bunch of people talking crap about him, lights a fire under his ass, but they like him. I
Yeah.
mean, just in terms of his work ethic relative to what it was for Cliff and Kime, I do think, and listen, some humans we all mature at different ages. Some guys are Peyton Manning, mature at 15.
That's
Other
right.
guys like Baker Mayfield, mature at 28. Some guys
Yeah.
are like Aaron Rodgers, who we're still not sure. So, I think, like, I do think we got to be open. You remember Kyler was a young player when he came into the NFL, and I do
Yeah.
think he's just playing the way he's playing is just pretty high level, competent football. And with his skill set, I mean, we've
Yeah.
never really seen a player like him.
Yeah.